Well, Harry Broadman is a former US international trade negotiator, and he joins me now. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, President Trump says his first request to Xi Jinping will be to open up China to American business. From a trade negotiator's point of view, is that a realistic ask, do you think, or is that more just a political slogan?
Well, I think it's very important that he's raised it. I think it's sort of both. I mean, obviously, he wants to get the markets open in a very tangible and concrete way. On the other hand, I think thinking about it through a Chinese lens, the opening, of course, has great symbolic significance. And I think, it would be really do well if both countries were to agree to open each other's markets, frankly, on equal footing, more or less.
Now, of course, rare earths appear to be one of Beijing's strongest cards at the moment. How valuable is the US still to Chinese control of critical minerals and processing, do you think?
Well, quite critical. I think that the distinction is between the raw materials and the refining of the materials, the minerals, and that's really where I think the negotiations need to focus rather than simply the mining of the minerals. Because it's the upstream that, gives some value, but it's really the downstream refinement of those minerals that is commercially important.
What would count as a serious trade outcome from this summit? And what would be merely cosmetic, in your opinion?
Well, I think for the U.S. side, and Chinese side, the agreement on export controls with very tangible performance indicators and realistic moves on export controls. To date, most of those moves have been symbolic, and I think the markets certainly understand where there's symbolism rather than actual, tangible moves to free up exports and imports, frankly, on both sides of the ledger.
Now, of course, we'll be looking out for all the press opportunities, the handshakes, the visits to various places, to the Forbidden City, etc., etc. But what should we be looking out for when the summit is over? There's the joint statement, the tariff schedules, export control licenses, or enforcement mechanisms, or a little bit of everything. What do you think we should be looking out for once it ends?
Well, I mean, the body language is important, but really what's most important is what would be in a communique, what's written down, and most importantly, not just what's written down, but how will each side measure whether or not they have fulfilled the obligations that they have made in the document that presumably is agreed upon. That's been the problem all along between U.S. and China, but frankly, it's also not unique to China. Having two trade partners agree on very tangible measures and, tick off exactly, we expect you to export X amount and you will import X amount, and let's make sure that those happen. When they don't have those kinds of tangible indicators, it just becomes rhetoric. And I think the markets certainly understand when that happens, and they'll just say, well, this was not much of a meeting.
Briefly, if you will, of course, they last met in 2017. That was the last time that the US president went across to Beijing. Since then, of course, we've had the tariff war, we've had the trade war. Did that actually achieve anything, do you think, in terms of leverage or disruption, or was it just for show?
Well, I think the Chinese sort of saw that, that Trump is sort of acting in a tangible kind of way. The problem is, and this is not unique to China, is that the world economy sees that Mr. Trump's, policy making says A one day and then B the next day and then C the next day. And I think the real issue is not what's written down on paper, but whether or not these are measurable indicators. And most importantly, I think, given who is in the White House right now, I don't think we've ever had a president who has been so peripatetic and moving all around, and one day he says X, the next day he says Y, and the third day he says Z. That's really problematic for the Chinese and for the world economy, as well as for the American economy.
Harry Broadman, thank you very much indeed for that.